Stephen Hamilton is an assistant professor of economics at George Washington University, and he joins me now. Hi there, Stephen. How are you going?
G'day, Kat. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Now, I believe that you've written on social media platform X that negative gearing occupies a large share of policy debate in Australia, and it's strange and disappointing. But according to the Parliamentary Budget Office, it costs the budget bottom line around $100 billion over 10 years. So shouldn't it take up some debate?
Yeah, g'day, Kat. So I guess we should be clear about exactly what our tax system is trying to achieve and how the various parts of our tax system achieve it. And if there are problems with our tax system, we should be clear about those problems and see, do these solutions solve those problems? So I think, yes, there is a problem with the way our tax system treats investment, and I think that does push up housing demand in unhelpful ways and push up prices. Absolutely. But that's got very little to do with negative gearing specifically, right?
Okay.
So,
tell us why, in your opinion, from a tax perspective, you don't think negative gearing is such a bad thing.
Yeah, so if you run a business and you pay your employees, you get to deduct the cost of your employees from the tax you pay to the tax office. If you invest in a property, and it's not just interest costs, but it could be the cost of replacing an oven of a tenant or whatever. There are lots of costs associated with owning a home. Then you should be able to deduct those costs against your income. Now, negative gearing means that if those costs are larger than the rent coming in, then you can claim that amount against your other sources of income. Now, that's not a problem. There's nothing wrong with that. But the problem is that when you sell the house, your capital gain is only taxed at half your marginal rate, but the expenses you incurred to generate that gain were deducted at full marginal rates. And so that itself is a problem, but that's about the way we tax capital gains, not about negative gearing.
But is the problem, though, that housing is seen as an investment asset here, which we know it's also necessary for people to live? We know that there's a housing crisis here in Australia. So hasn't the policy somewhat affected the character of the housing market, pitting investors with would-be buyers to live in those places?
Yeah, as I said, this system we have does encourage too much investment in housing. There's no doubt, right? If you get taxed at 23.5%, but you can deduct the cost at 47%, it's a pretty good idea. Let's do it, right? So we should curb that. That's not negative gearing, that's capital gains tax. But I would also make the point that we need to be careful. Investment in housing is good. Why? Because it helps more houses be built. It helps the housing stock improve in quality, right? It helps us densify land and build bigger structures and allow more people to live there. So we need to be extremely careful about how we treat the investment settings around housing, because we really need more houses. And that points us to the real problem with our housing market, which is that supply is too constrained. And I think all of our efforts, rather than tinkering about tax measures over here, really should be on that kind of fundamentally increasing the supply of houses.
So would changes to negative gearing impact positively on the house supply and house prices, or negatively?
I'm certain it would be negative. There's no doubt about that. Mm-hmm. The question is how negative. And I think the idea that people have is that it would be more fair, in the sense that there would be fewer investors and more owner-occupiers. But the cost of that would be that the housing market overall would be less functional. And I would have to say, I think we have a housing emergency in Australia that has horrible economic and social effects. And so I don't think we can really afford to be looking at fairness. I think we need to be looking mainly at how the hell do we build more houses so we ensure, right, that we reduce homelessness, that, we make everyone's lives better, we help our inflation crisis. And that can only be dealt with by building more houses.
Okay, and just in the last minute that we've got, if you don't see negative gearing as the problem, or the solution rather, to the housing crisis, then what reforms are necessary?
Yeah, so I think the housing supply reforms are big. If we're talking about taxes specifically, we should look at a system like the Nordic countries have in Northern Europe, which is they treat all investment income in the tax return separately, right? So you have shares, you have interest on a bank deposit, you have rent from a property, and you have expenses on those things. You do all of those taxes in a little bubble by themselves. and you pay tax at a flat rate on all of those sources of income. And that system, which we definitely don't have in Australia, works much better, right? So I think moving to more fundamental reform of the way we tax investment could give us kind of more of everything, right? More fairness, more efficiency, more houses built, all of the things we want.
Stephen Hamilton, it's always a pleasure speaking with you. Thanks for your time.
Cheers, Kat.